This last week, from Friday to Friday, I was invited by a family from my hometown, Pequot Lakes. Yes, I'm not from around here. You can tell by my last name. I've had many temptations to change it to like Craigovich or Craigorini or something like that. But I haven't done that. It costs money. So, in the end, the Rome pilgrimage reminded me a lot of where the Lord taught me truths of the faith. My time in Rome in theology for 4 years, I got to stay at the seminary this last week where I spent those 4 years. So it was good to be there and reflect a little bit where this was 4 years of my life. I lived in this big, huge building here in Rome, and I walked through these streets constantly praying to the Lord about various things, the struggling with certain things that He was calling me to give up a wife and kids, to continue forward in the call that He's issued to me for a way of life of holiness. And the other struggles of being far from home, of course, was part of it too, but not that bad because it was an adventure and it was Rome. And this last week I was with a family that invited me to go with them, and I'm very grateful for them, and it was a gift. I did not deserve any of it, but it was a beautiful time of prayer, and I prayed for all of you while I was there, especially at the tomb of St. Peter, there in the base of the Basilica of St. Peter. And I also prayed that I be a good priest for you. One of the truths that we are confronted with the gospel and with the readings is that all of our problems stem from really one real fact, is that our spiritual health is lacking. Our communion with God is a little distant. And our vision is one of those images for that. You know, Bartimaeus is blind, he's in darkness, and he needs light. A lot of us don't really have a great physical vision. I mean, this is part of my life too. I'm like 20/50 or 20/60. I don't know what I am. It's just all I know is that, you know, if I take out my contacts, the world looks like a Monet painting or some sort of impressionist thing where it's like, man, I don't know what that is. I know there's a blur right there. But that is representative of the fact that a lot of us and all of us still need spiritual healing, spiritual strength to be who God has made us to be. He's called each one of us into a saintly life, and that's His will, and it's conformity to His will, and then to love His will eventually. Jeremiah, from our first reading, was called by God from his youth to speak on these truths. And the poor Jeremiah, he really just didn't have much right out of the gates. He was heated. He was totally given a warning that from his youth, the nation of Judah would not listen to him, and his preaching. They would not. And he spent his whole life warning Jerusalem and Judah of their impending destruction and at the hands of the Babylonians. Neither prince nor people ever heeded his advice. He lived through the destruction of Jerusalem and witnessed his home, his family, and his nation destroyed by their own unwillingness to listen and their obstinance. But then we have today's reading. It's like the one bright spot in all of the book of Jeremiah. In the Old Testament, Jeremiah has 52 chapters. And from 30 to 33, they call it the book of consolation. That's where he speaks of a time in the future where there will be restoration to what will be destroyed. And that will be the time of Jesus. And he will then lead them to new brooks of water on level ground so that none will stumble. And God will show himself as a father to Israel, and Ephraim will be his firstborn. This is the joy that we live in now because of Jesus' coming, restoration. And we pray it's still in the psalm, though, because we still have things missing in our lives. We say, restore our fortunes, O Lord. Restore them. Restore what was lost. And God is the one that restores what was lost. So let's go to the gospel for a moment. Jesus was leaving Jericho. Jericho is about 15 miles from Jerusalem. It's actually where a lot of the priests that served the temple lived. They would have been among some of the crowd. They would have watched this scene going by. Jesus and a sizable crowd going along the road from Jericho to Jerusalem. And Bartimaeus, a blind man, son of Timaeus. It's kind of redundant because Bartimaeus, bar is just means son. Timaeus, a blind man, the son of Timaeus. All right, so you're like, all right, you just said that twice. But there's some meaning in that. Timaeus is a Greek word, actually means honor or honorable. The son of an honorable man with a Greek name. Plato wrote a Socratic dialogue called the Timaeus. So it's interesting. And there's the fact that he's named, this man who's healed. A lot of the healings of Jesus, we don't know their names. This means that we can reasonably assume that Bartimaeus lived for many years after this, following Jesus and the rest of his community, telling them about this story. And Mark writes his gospel there in Rome, learning from Bartimaeus' story, and also St. Peter telling the other parts of the story to him so that he would write it down. This is significant. So we have Bartimaeus along the roadside begging. Hearing that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me." We all repeat the same words of Bartimaeus in Mass when we say, "Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy." Because have mercy, if you're here on Sunday mornings, we say, "Kyrie eleison." We sing it, of course, we chant it because Father likes to sing. No, it's because Jesus sang at the Last Supper, which was the first Mass, and that's why we sing in the Mass. It's because Jesus did it, and we're imitating him. So we say, "Kyrie eleison," Lord, have mercy on me. So that's one of the parts of the liturgy that actually stuck in Greek. Because for the first 300 years, 350 really, the liturgy was pretty much all in Greek. And if you look at the creed that we will say in a few moments, that was all written in Greek. To remember also the beginnings of the church, of our brothers and sisters in faith. They began this, and we share also that same story and history with them. So, Kyrie eleison. Eleison me, he's saying. Jesus, Son of David, eleison me. But many rebuked him, telling him to be silent, but he kept out calling all the more. So the first thing to recognize about Bartimaeus is his persistence. This wasn't just some casual, I wonder about Jesus. Wonder what he's like. Maybe I should get a little closer to him. What's he like? Hey, Jesus. No. This was a desperate desire, and he called out his persistence. And then the crowd told him to shut up. The crowd told him to be silent. You and I also experience this because the crowds, a sizable crowd today, tell us to don't go near Jesus. You know, don't waste his time. He doesn't have time for you. He doesn't have time for your mundane requests. The crowd will tell us this. Those who will keep us from Jesus. And in fact, our distractions keep us from Jesus. A sizable crowd today indeed. And they push us from him. But if we can learn from Bartimaeus, if anything, he teaches us that if there's obstacles and we want something, we will push through those to the other side, to break on through to the other side. And you know what I mean? He kept going. He responds immediately when Jesus says, he stops and he says, call him. So they called the blind man, take courage, get up. Jesus is calling you. And he responds with immediacy and eagerness because he threw aside his cloak, that which clung to him. He threw it off, sprang up, and came to Jesus. So he responded with this immediacy when Jesus called him. He cast off that hindering cloak. We have attachments. We have things that we are attached to that we don't want to let go of. But when we hear the call of Jesus, learn from Bartimaeus, because there's sometimes in us a wave of longing to abandon some habit, to purify life of some sin, and to give ourselves more completely to Jesus. That's where we really will meet our true self, where we will encounter Jesus very beautifully when we come to him and we respond with immediacy. And then Bartimaeus had a precise want. And it's kind of interesting that Jesus asks him, right? If he's God, he knows this already. But he says to him, what do you want me to do for you? What a beautiful question. Jesus' questions, there's so much wisdom in them, you could pray on them all the time. What do you want me to do for you? Just envision Jesus before you now, asking this same question. Lord, you know what I need. You know it. You know me better than I know myself. You know what I need. You know what I want. But he wants us to express it in our prayer. And then this Bartimaeus says, Master, I want to see. My teacher, actually the word is Rabboni, so teacher, I want to see. He has this true, precise want, sight. You and I sometimes come into God's presence without knowing what to pray for, but when you think about it, gosh, there are things off kilter in our lives. We go to a doctor and we have a specific need usually. All right, my sinuses, there's tons of pressure. I need help with that. Or we go to a dentist and we've got this toothache. And we're like, this thing right here, this particular one, that's the one I want you to fix. This specific need. And we have them. We bring them to Jesus, who is physician and dentist. I mean, he's everything. And he can do it. And Bartimaeus says these things with the honesty of a human heart. And his response was very honest. I want to see. Lord, that I may see. St. Jose Maria said this kind of prayer early on in his life. Oh Lord, that I may see. Because we want to see the truth of our vocations as married people, as widows, widowers. Lord, that I may see what your will is for me each day. How can I please you in my life? I am willing to turn a corner if I must. And I want you to show me that way, that I may see it. Give me that sight. And the reception of sight then by Bartimaeus, he then followed Jesus. He began with need and ends with a loyalty. Because he was the one that then recounted this story to the gospel writers later on. He stuck around. He was a follower of Jesus. This reality then can teach us so much about our way. And you can remember these points just by reading that gospel again. To express in your life what you want Jesus to do for you. Go on your way. We'll want to follow Jesus in this, and we are all beggars. We are all like Bartimaeus. That is the truth of the matter. God is the one that restores what was lost. We must ask like Bartimaeus, Lord, that I may see. I remember visiting a year ago in the city of Venice, Italy, where the body of St. Lucy is. Santa Lucia. It's actually interesting that the Venetians kind of stole her body from Sicily. The Italians, they're pretty shrewd sometimes. But it was about a saint. And so she's buried there. St. Lucy is an early church martyr. She was a young woman when she was martyred. She's the patron saint of blindness and of diseases of the eye. I was there visiting St. Lucy, and there was a worker in there. She wasn't a native Italian, but she was speaking in Italian to me, and she said, yes, there's this Brazilian couple that just came here, and they just left a couple of days ago, and they came here to give thanksgiving to St. Lucy for her intercession. I said, well, what happened? And she said, well, their daughter, around 10 years old, had a creeping blindness. And by the time she was 13, she was completely blind. And they prayed to St. Lucy consistently with a novia, and she was restored to her sight on the 9th day of that novena. She received her sight. And the doctors couldn't explain it, so this Brazilian couple had made a pilgrimage to Venice to the tomb of St. Lucy to give thanks. And then this worker in the church who was telling me this story, she said, everything that people ask for from St. Lucy is answered. And I was just like, whoa, well, all right, there's confidence, which is good. St. Lucy, it's a beautiful name too. I hope there's more kids that are born that have Lucy and as a name. But Santa Lucia, she is this patron saint of blindness. We can actually ask for her intercession too, to draw us closer to Jesus, that we might receive our sight and our spiritual blindness will be healed by him. Tell him what you want him to do for you.